"I'm not the pretty one you ordered," said the shelter bride. The rich cowboy smiled. "You're all I needed." Wyoming Territory, near the town of Grayston. Late summer, 1877. The dust lifted behind the stagecoach as it came to a halt in front of the small depot. The sun hung low, gold and merciless, baking the wooden platform where two men waited beside a wagon. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and dry grass across the wide, empty land. Inside the coach, Emmeline Grace pressed a trembling hand against her cheek, feeling the rough edge of the birthmark that had drawn whispers all her life. She smoothed her skirt, faded but clean, and clutched the letter folded in her pocket. The paper bore another woman's name, yet it had brought her here, a mistake she had not dared to correct. The driver swung the door open. "Grayston, stop, ma'am. End of the line." Emmeline stepped down slowly, boots sinking into the dust. Her bonnet shaded most of her face, and the weight of every glance in the small crowd pressed against her back. She saw him immediately. Cole Merritt stood by the wagon reins, tall and broad-shouldered, a man who looked born to belong under the open sky. His shirt sleeves were rolled. His hat shadowed a face that carried both kindness and distance. There was something measured in the way he moved, like a man who had learned to expect little and be surprised by less. Their eyes met for the first time. She took a breath that trembled. "Mr. Merritt?" He gave a small nod. "You must be Miss Grace." She hesitated, voice barely rising above the wind. "There has been a mistake. I am not the pretty one you ordered." For a moment, silence stretched between them, only the creak of the wagon wheels filling the air. Then Cole's lips curved into the faintest smile, one that reached his eyes. "You're all I needed," he said simply. The words hung there, soft but steady, like the promise of rain after a long drought. Emmeline blinked, unsure if she had heard right. She had expected disappointment, perhaps anger, not gentleness. Her heart stumbled in confusion. Cole motioned to the wagon. "It's a long ride to the ranch. You can rest on the way." She climbed up, careful not to meet the stares from the few townspeople still watching. The driver clucked at the horses, and the wagon rolled away from the depot, rattling over the dry road. The silence between them was not hostile, only unfamiliar. Emmeline kept her hands folded tight in her lap, the letter crumpled inside one palm. Cole glanced at her once or twice, then back to the horizon. "You came all the way from Illinois?" he asked finally. "Yes," she said. "The shelter arranged it. They said a bride was requested for a man named Cole Merritt. That would be me." "They must have sent the wrong woman," she murmured. He gave a quiet laugh. "Maybe the right one got lost. Either way, you're here." They passed through rolling hills dotted with cattle and cedar trees. The land opened wider with every mile, its loneliness vast but strangely peaceful. The sun softened into evening, painting the fields in honeyed light. At last, the outline of the Merritt Ranch appeared, a stretch of white fences, a few outbuildings, and a two-story house that looked sturdy but empty. Cole stopped the wagon at the gate. "It isn't much, but it stands," he said. Emmeline looked at the land. "It looks like it belongs to someone who works hard." He tilted his head slightly, almost amused. "That's fair enough." He helped her down, his hand rough but careful. The warmth of his palm startled her more than the touch itself. "I can find my way from here," she said softly, unsure of where she belonged in this vast place. "I reckon you'll find it soon enough," he replied. "You're safe here, Miss Grace. That's what matters." The sun sank behind the hills, casting long shadows across the yard. The air grew cooler, quieter. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to her without pity or judgment. Emmeline turned toward the porch, her heart caught between fear and an unfamiliar flicker of hope. Behind her, Cole watched silently, hands resting on the reins, eyes following the small figure who had just changed everything. The Merritt Ranch stretched wide and quiet beneath the pale morning sky. The land rippled in soft folds, golden with grass and dappled by slow-moving clouds. The house stood at its heart, 2 stories of weathered timber and sun-faded paint, its shutters slightly crooked from years of wind. It looked strong, but lonely. A house built to endure, not to welcome. There had been no ceremony, no preacher's voice cutting the air, no ring slipped onto her hand. Just ink on paper at the town hall, the clerk's half-hearted nod, and the words, "That's enough for the law." Emmeline had nodded too, lips pressed into a line, her heart too full of questions to ask any of them. Yet when she stepped into the house, her boots silent on the worn floorboards, she felt not like a wife crossing a threshold, but like a stranger trespassing. It smelled of pine and old smoke and something faintly metallic, like years of silence rusting in the corners. Everything was neatly placed, as though someone lived here without ever settling in. A single coat hung by the door. A pair of boots rested beneath it, perfectly aligned. The fire in the hearth crackled low, feeding slowly on dry cedar. In the kitchen, Mrs. Marla met her with a look that cut through her borrowed composure. She was tall and straight-backed, her gray hair pinned into a knot so tight it seemed to pull at the corners of her mouth. Her voice was not unkind, but it carried no warmth. After one long glance, she leaned toward the younger maid beside her and muttered, "She's not like the kind he used to bring around." From outside the window, Emmeline heard the muffled voice of the stable hand, Gabe. "That's the one he married?" he said, disbelief thick in his tone. "Doesn't seem his choice." The words stuck to her skin like dust. She walked through the house and felt them trail behind her, unseen but heavy. She tried, quietly and without drawing attention, to help. In the kitchen, she rolled up her sleeves and offered to peel potatoes. Mrs. Marla only shook her head. "This stove's temperamental, you'll just burn your hands." When Emmeline took a broom out to the porch, Gabe intercepted her before she'd made it to the steps. "Best not," he said, with a polite shrug. "The boss wouldn't want you roughing up your fingers." She wasn't dismissed, she was simply not needed. By evening, she felt more ghost than guest. No one was cruel, but no one invited her in. She ate alone in the corner of the kitchen, said little, and listened to the quiet that pressed in from every wall. Cole said almost nothing. He left early each morning, returning late with the scent of horses and dust clinging to his sleeves. He did not introduce her, did not defend her, but neither did he demand anything. It was as if he had accepted her presence, the same way one accepts a sudden storm, unexpected, but not worth resisting. Yet something softened the silence. Each morning, outside her bedroom door, she found a cup of coffee still warm, and a slice of bread laid neatly on a plate. On colder days, a wool coat appeared on the banister, just her size. One afternoon, she returned from a walk to find a second pillow on her bed, softer than the first, and smelling faintly of cedar. He never mentioned any of it. Never asked if she'd noticed. One night, long after the house had gone quiet, she crept downstairs for a drink of water. The lamp still burned in the sitting room. Cole sat hunched over the table, needle in hand, sewing the hem of her coat where it had torn last week. "You don't have to do that," she said, startled. Without looking up, he murmured, "It needed fixing." She hesitated in the doorway. "You shouldn't trouble yourself with my things." His fingers moved with steady care. "This place isn't good at welcoming strangers, but don't let them make you feel like one." The words weren't flowery, they weren't grand, but they lodged in her chest like warmth after a long frost. That night, standing at her window, she watched moonlight sweep over the fields, soft as breath. The world outside was still, and inside, something unfroze. She pressed a hand to her heart, whispering into the quiet, "He didn't choose me for beauty, but the things he does are more beautiful than any promise I have ever heard." The days had settled into a quiet rhythm. Leaves turned gold along the edges of the fields, and the wind carried a soft bite that hinted at winter's approach. Emmeline had lived under Cole's roof for weeks now, yet the silence between them remained like a closed door neither dared to knock on. Each morning, Cole rose before the sun, working from dark to dark. Whether repairing fences or tending the herd, he always rode alone, his silhouette a distant mark against the sky. Emmeline often stood on the porch, watching him vanish into the horizon. When she tried to bring him meals, he offered only a nod, took a few bites in silence, then returned to work. His words were few, his eyes always scanning the distance. Yet, in those quiet moments, Emmeline sensed something buried deep beneath the silence. The others called him iron cold, but she had seen the way he replaced her torn shawl without a word, the way he glanced back at the porch before riding out. He avoided her gaze, but she felt his presence like the echo of a song he was not ready to play. Then came the accident. She was returning from the henhouse when she saw him near the far pasture, fixing a section of barbed wire. The wire snapped, a sharp metallic twang. He jerked back, clutching his arm. Blood bloomed across his sleeve. She ran, heart pounding. "Cole," she called, kneeling beside him. "I'm fine," he muttered, trying to pull away. But she held firm. "You helped me when I was lost. Let me help you now." He did not resist again. She unbuttoned his cuff, revealing a deep gash, and beneath it, a thick scar that twisted down his forearm like old lightning. Her hands trembled slightly as she cleaned and wrapped the wound, but her voice was steady. When it was done, she looked up. "This scar, it's old." He was quiet for a long moment, then said, "It's from a fire, a long time ago." She waited. "I was engaged once, Clara. She was from the East, elegant. She wanted the world, not a ranch hand with burned skin." He gave a dry laugh, one that didn't reach his eyes. "After that, I stopped letting anyone stay long enough to look close." The wind stirred the grass around them. Emmeline did not rush to fill the silence. When he started to rise, she touched his arm gently. "We don't get to choose the marks life gives us, Cole, only how we carry them." He looked at her then, really looked. Not past her, not around her, at her, like someone seeing something he thought had been lost. That night, rain whispered against the windows. Emmeline could not sleep. She rose, pulled a shawl over her shoulders, and stepped quietly onto the porch. Soft guitar notes drifted through the dark. There, on the bench near the doorway, Cole sat with the old guitar she had seen gathering dust in the corner of the parlor. His fingers moved slowly across the strings. The melody was imperfect, but it carried a quiet sorrow, tender and raw. She sat on the steps, silent. The firelight behind the window caught his face in amber and shadow. His scarred hand moved without hesitation now. No masks, no distance. The music did not ask for anything. It simply offered itself. The next morning, as Emmeline dressed, she noticed something different. A new door, narrow and freshly built, had been added to her room, leading to the porch. Morning light spilled through the glass. Later, Cole passed her in the hall. He paused, then said simply, "Morning light's kind out here. Thought you might like it." He did not wait for a reply. She sat by the window that evening, a small journal open in her lap. In it, she wrote one quiet line. "He carries his pain like a quiet song. And maybe I was sent here to listen." What she did not know was that from across the hall, through the narrow crack of his door, Cole had seen her writing. And for the first time since she arrived, a smile touched his face. Not wide, not loud, but real. The wind was dry that day, carrying dust across the hills and rattling the empty feed buckets hanging by the barn. Emmeline was out by the garden patch, pulling weeds from between the stalks of autumn vegetables. She wore one of the simpler dresses Marla had let her keep, sleeves rolled, hair tied in a ribbon. Cole had left on her door one morning without a word. The air was still until it wasn't. The sound of hooves broke the quiet, not fast, but deliberate, measured. Emmeline straightened, brushing dirt from her hands, and turned toward the path leading up from the main road. A rider was approaching, not a courier, not a neighbor. A man in a dark coat and high boots, with sharp eyes and a thin smile. His horse was lathered from travel. He dismounted without a word. Cole stepped out from the barn, wiping his hands with a rag. He moved with the same calm as always, but Emmeline saw the subtle shift in his shoulders. The stranger looked straight at her. "Miss Emmeline Grace," he said with the smoothness of someone used to getting what he wanted. "Took me a good long ride to find you." She took a step back. "I am Luther Kane," he continued. Your late guardian appointed me your legal overseer, seeing as how you were registered under his name. I have papers to prove it. You were promised as payment to a man in Missouri, which means you don't have the right to marry without my consent." The words hit like cold iron. Emmeline felt the world tilt. All the weeks of quiet, of healing, of beginning to believe she might belong somewhere, began to crack beneath her feet. "I'm not property," she whispered, her voice trembling. The man smirked. "Contracts say otherwise. I've come to collect." She stepped back again, panic rising in her chest. She saw Marla watching from the kitchen window. One of the stable boys had frozen mid-step near the well. And Cole? Cole folded the rag slowly, placed it on a fence post, and walked toward them. He did not raise his voice. He did not ask questions. He simply stood between her and the man, his eyes cold as stone. "You've got 2 minutes to ride off this land," he said, every word sharp and deliberate. "Or I'll make sure you don't ride again." Luther laughed once, short and dry. "She's mine by law." "No," Cole said, "she isn't." Luther opened his mouth again, but something in Cole's expression stopped him. The silence stretched long. Then Luther turned, spat in the dirt, and climbed back onto his horse. He didn't say another word. The hooves pounded away, disappearing over the ridge. Emmeline realized she had been holding her breath. Cole turned back to her. "You all right?" She nodded slowly, but her hands still trembled. He didn't touch her. He didn't offer comfort in words. But he stood there, between her and the path, until the dust settled. That night, Emmeline sat by the fire, knees drawn close. She stared into the flames. "He knew where I came from," she said quietly. "He knew everything." Cole sat in the chair across from her, hands folded. "Then we'll change what they know." She looked at him. "You didn't even ask if it was true." He met her eyes. "Didn't need to." And that, somehow, meant more than any vow could. The past had tried to reach for her, but someone had stood in the way. The days grew longer as late autumn warmed the air just enough to coax green from the edges of the hills. The porch boards creaked under Emmeline's steps as she moved barefoot across them, a small trowel in one hand, a bundle of wildflower roots in the other. She had asked no one. No one had told her she could, but one morning, when the wind felt less cold and the sky less heavy, she began to dig. Yellow prairie daisies, blue flax, and tiny white blossoms took root in the soil just outside the porch rail. She watered them with the leftover pail from washing clothes, humming softly to herself as she worked. Later that week, she found the guitar in the storage shed. It sat behind a broken chair and a wheel that no longer matched any wagon. Dust coated its body. One of the strings had snapped, and another was rusted, but she carried it inside with both hands, like it was something sacred. In the evening light, she cleaned it slowly. She polished the wood until it gleamed faintly, and replaced the broken strings with the spares she had found in a small wooden drawer nearby. It smelled faintly of smoke and cedar, and she wondered who had played it last. That night after dinner, she brought the guitar out to the porch and strummed a few uncertain chords. The sound was a little off, but not broken. She adjusted it, tried again, and a soft melody filled the quiet around the house. Cole did not come out to listen, but the lamp in his room stayed lit a long while. By the end of the week, she had sewn new curtains and hung them in the kitchen window. She found an old oil lantern in the attic and placed it on the sill, lighting it each evening as the sun sank behind the ridge. For the first time since she arrived, she did not feel like a visitor. She did not feel like a mistake delivered by train. She felt like a stitch in the fabric of the house, like someone who might belong. She no longer looked in the mirror and saw someone temporary. The wildflowers curled toward the light, and she stood a little straighter when she passed them. It was 3 days after the curtains went up when Cole knocked on her door. He looked freshly washed, hair damp, shirt tucked for once. His boots scuffed the floor as he stood there, almost sheepish. "Do you want to have dinner at the table with me tomorrow?" he asked, rubbing the back of his neck. Emmeline blinked. The question was so plain, so simple. yet it cracked something open in her chest. She smiled. "I'd like that." Cole nodded once and walked away. She closed the door softly behind her, the sound of her heartbeat louder than her footsteps. That night, she played the guitar again. This time, the notes rang clearer, softer, like the house itself was learning a new song. The clouds rolled in heavy and dark over the Wyoming plains, folding the land into shadow. The wind picked up with a low, untrustworthy whistle. Cole had seen this kind of sky before, quiet before the rage. A storm was coming. By late afternoon, thunder cracked like gunfire above the Merritt Ranch. Horses in the corral skittered and whinnied, ears pinned back, nerves on edge. Emmeline stood on the front porch, hands clenched in her apron, as she watched Cole and Gabe race to secure the stables. "You should get inside," Gabe shouted over the wind. But Cole was already unlatching the last pen, trying to coax the young foal out of the open paddock. Lightning split the sky just as the colt bucked in panic. Cole grabbed the rope and pulled, a sharp cry cutting through the wind as the animal kicked against him, catching his shoulder. He staggered. Blood bloomed through his shirt. "God, no," Emmeline whispered, and rushed out into the storm. She reached him just as he managed to push the colt into the stable. Rain soaked through her dress in seconds. She grabbed his arm, gasped at the sight of the gash. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing," he muttered through gritted teeth. "It's not nothing." She guided him toward the house, his boots dragging slightly in the mud. Once inside, she sat him in the wooden chair near the kitchen hearth and ran for the tin box of linen and whiskey. Her hands trembled as she poured the liquor over the wound. "You helped me when I was lost," she said, voice tight. "Let me help you now." Cole's eyes never left her face. Even with her wet hair clinging to her cheeks, her expression held steady, gentle, certain. "Stubborn thing," he murmured. She looked up. "And you're just figuring that out?" He managed a smile. As she wrapped the bandage around his arm, she spoke softly, not to distract him but to soothe the silence thick between them. "I was 9 when the war took my parents. The nuns said I was lucky to be sent to the Illinois shelter, but lucky never felt like the right word. I remember one winter, the roof leaked so bad our beds froze to the floorboards. We used to sleep in shifts, trading blankets like cards." Cole's jaw tightened. That shouldn't happen to children. She didn't answer, just tied the bandage snug and sat back, brushing damp hair from her eyes. Then his hand found hers, warm, rough, real. "You were never second best," he said, his voice low. "Never." The words struck her with more force than the thunder outside. She blinked, uncertain if she had heard him right. He squeezed her hand. "I should have said that a long time ago." Outside, the storm raged on, but in that small kitchen, something shifted. Later that night, she brought him tea and sat across from him near the fire. He was pale, but not fading, just quiet, watchful. "Did you mean it?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "I've meant it since you showed up in that gray dress, looking like you were ready to fight the whole world." A pause. "Turns out, you didn't have to, you just had to stay." Lightning flared again, casting long shadows across the walls. Emmeline looked at the man before her, injured, scarred, silent, and saw someone not broken but enduring. Not hardened but protecting something deeply soft. The storm passed some time before dawn. When the sky turned soft pink, Cole was asleep on the couch, breath even, arm bandaged. Emmeline sat beside him with the guitar in her lap, strumming low and slow, like a lullaby only he was meant to hear. And maybe for the first time, he heard it. Summer lingered longer that year, stretching into golden afternoons and slow, honey-colored evenings. The town of Larkspur Ridge began to hum again as harvest approached, and school bells rang across the prairie. For the first time since she arrived, Emmeline felt the ground beneath her feet belonged to her, too. She had begun teaching music at the small schoolhouse near the church, gathering the town's children each Saturday morning beneath the old sycamore tree. They sang old folk tunes and learned steps to reels and jigs, their laughter carrying past the fences and into the dusty main road. Cole watched sometimes from a distance, leaning against a post, pretending to check his boots. He never came too close, but Emmeline could feel his eyes like sunlight on her skin. One morning, after the last song faded into the air, the preacher's wife approached Emmeline with a smile. "You've brought something back to this town, dear. Something we didn't even know we were missing." Emmeline blushed and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Just trying to keep them out of trouble." Later that week, Cole came in from the fields early, his hat dusty, shirt clinging with sweat. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen, looked at her with an expression halfway between nervous and determined. "I was thinking," he said slowly, "maybe it's time we had folks over." Emmeline paused, mid-stir. "Folks?" "Town folks. For supper. Nothing fancy. Just some food, music, something different." She stared at him. "You want to host a dinner?" He scratched his neck. "You said this place felt too quiet. Thought maybe it's time to change that." She smiled. "All right, let's do it." They spent 3 days preparing. Emmeline baked until dawn, with help from Mrs. Marla and 2 neighbor girls. Cole strung lanterns along the porch beams, sanded the old picnic tables, and even swept the path to the barn twice over. When the evening came, the sun had just begun to sink. Wagons pulled up the long drive. People stepped down in Sunday clothes, carrying casseroles and jars of preserves. Children ran ahead with ribbons in their hair. The air smelled of biscuits, sweetgrass, and cedar smoke. What surprised everyone was not just the gathering itself, but who stood at the center of it. It was Emmeline who greeted each guest, who arranged the food, who invited the children to sing around before supper. She moved through the crowd with quiet grace, her laughter easy, her face lit by more than the lanterns. "She's the one running this place now," someone whispered. Cole barely spoke that evening, except to refill drinks or lift a tray. But his eyes never left Emmeline. As the stars came out and the tables were scraped clean, Cole stepped forward and cleared his throat. Silence settled. Crickets chirped. "I didn't get the bride I asked for," he began, voice low but steady. "I got something better. I got her." Gasps and quiet murmurs rippled through the crowd. He turned to Emmeline, reaching into his pocket. In his hand was a simple gold ring, worn and old, his mother's. He stepped closer. "You came here by mistake, but staying that was your choice, and the best damn thing that ever happened to me." He took her hand. "I know this ain't how most stories start, and I know I'm not the easiest man to love, but I'd spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you deserve." He dropped to one knee. "Will you marry me, Emmeline Grace, proper this time?" For a moment, the world stood still. Then Emmeline nodded, tears catching the light. "Yes," she whispered, "yes." The crowd erupted, children clapped, someone cried, and Mrs. Marla wiped her nose on her sleeve with a sniff. Cole rose, slipped the ring onto her finger, and pulled her gently into his arms. No vows yet, no preacher. But under the rafters of the porch and the open sky, something sacred had already been spoken. The wedding was not held in a church or beneath crystal chandeliers. It took place in a clearing behind the house, where the tall grass bowed with the wind, and the sun stretched long shadows across the hills. Emmeline had planted a small arch there weeks ago with wild wisteria cuttings, coaxing the vines to climb. Now purple blooms twisted above their heads, swaying gently with the breeze. There were no pews, only hay bales, draped with patchwork quilts. No violin or organ, only the distant chirping of meadowlarks. And instead of a gown, Emmeline wore a soft blue cotton dress, the same one she had mended with her own hands. Her hair was braided down her back, a few wisps curling loose in the warm air. Cole stood beside her in a clean white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, the same boots he wore to mend fences. He held no bouquet, no scroll of vows, only her hand, calloused and warm in his. The townspeople gathered quietly, their smiles soft, their voices hushed. A preacher from 2 towns over read a short blessing, but the words that mattered came after. Cole turned to her, voice steady. "I don't have fancy promises, just this one, to stand beside you, rain or shine, till the breath leaves me." Emmeline looked up at him, her eyes wet but shining. "I came here by mistake. But I stayed because I found something true. You never asked me to change. So I promise I'll stay just like this, honest, messy, and yours." The preacher nodded, and that was enough. They kissed gently, surrounded by open sky and the scent of wildflowers. No one clapped. It didn't feel like that kind of moment. It felt like something the earth itself wanted to hold still for. Later, after the guests had gone and the lanterns flickered out, Emmeline stood alone in the quiet bedroom. She faced the mirror. For a long time she simply looked. The birthmark on her cheek was still there. So were the soft lines from years of work and wind. But her eyes didn't flinch away. For the first time she saw not a girl who was chosen by accident, but a woman who had chosen her place. Behind her, the floor creaked gently. Cole's reflection joined hers. He slipped his arms around her waist, resting his chin lightly on her shoulder. "You still think I got the wrong bride?" he murmured. She smiled, blinking once. "No, I think we got exactly what we needed." He kissed her temple, then whispered against her hair. "You were all I ever needed." Outside, the prairie stretched wide and golden beneath the stars. Inside, nothing more was said. Nothing needed to be. If this story touched your heart even half as much as Emmeline touched Cole's, don't forget to hit that hype button and show it some love. And if you're yearning for more dusty trails, quiet cowboys, and love that grows like wildflowers, subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. There's a whole